For joining. Got a room full here at Velma Jackson, and we're recording this for our friends at Rosa Scott, Ridgeland High, and Germantown High as well. Thank you for taking time for us today. I know you're extremely busy. My high school classmate, Tiffany Grove, Hinds County Circuit Court Judge, correct?
Chancery, but close. I'm across the street from Circuit.
Okay, well, and before, and obviously we want to hear the difference between them because I think a lot of people just think what they see on TV is all y'all do in court. Now I know it's a lot more than that. There's a lot of jobs available. We've gotten through with the government career cluster, and we're in the law and public safety career cluster, which you kind of do both of. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into this and what all you do over there in Hinds County?
Well, good afternoon. I'm happy to be here with y'all, even if it is via Zoom instead of in person. The technology has allowed us to do a lot of great things, and it allows me to be there and give you guys 30 minutes as opposed to what would have been a couple hours. So I'll start by saying that my name is Tiffany Grove. I went to high school, public Madison Central graduate, obviously a classmate of your teachers, class of 1997, so I'm a little older. Public school educated and then went on to the University of Southern Mississippi and then went to Mississippi College School of Law. And I like to tell people that, a lot of times our paths are chosen by different things. My path was chosen by where it was going to cost me the least amount of money to go to school. And I think that's just a real life, I applied and who would give me the most scholarship or where could I go for the least amount of money. And so surprisingly, that ended up with me being here in Jackson and going to Mississippi College School of Law and graduated from there and clerked for a Court of Appeals judge here in Jackson for a year and then went to private practice. I have never done a criminal case in my entire life. I've never been a criminal lawyer. I don't do criminal cases in court. That's not the kind of judge I am. And so that goes to show that there's all kinds of lawyers and all kinds of judges because you see on TV, you think, well, lawyers, maybe you think, the crime shows or you may think Judge Judy, which is a lot more like what I am. And if I had my show, it would be probably as entertaining as some of the stuff you hear on Judge Judy. But anyways, getting back to what I did and how I got to where I am. So at private practice for 13 years until I decided to run for judge. And if you heard me say run, I mean campaign and get elected to be a judge, which is very fitting because today is election day. It is the first Tuesday in November. I'm not sure that y'all have any elections going on. It's a special election for us here in Hinds County. Our sheriff died, and so we're electing a new sheriff. And we also had a judge that didn't finish out a term. And so there's a special election for a judge, but not a lot of elections going on, not a lot driving people out to the polls today. But next year I'll get to run. And so next year I'll be on the ballot in Hinds County and have to be out there, campaigning like I did 4 years ago for the job I have now. And so, talking about different avenues and different job opportunities, I never thought about being an elected official and running for office. We see like our president or our governor, some of the more high profile elected positions, but there are so many elected positions. You're the coroner, the person who, decides that people are deceased and on their death certificates, the coroner, that's an elected position. The tax collector or the tax assessor or the circuit clerk, the sheriff, like we just talked about, the sheriff in our counties are elected. And so there's all kinds of jobs that people get by being elected by people in their communities. And it's one of the foundations of our system, but it's definitely a different way to get a job. You're applying to the citizens that vote for you. So I've been a Chancery Court judge. This is my third year. And Chancery Court is a court of equity, meaning that if you are in Chancery Court, you are suing for something other than just money. It may be money, but it may be child support, it may be divorce, it may be an estate, it may be land. Now, in Hinds County, I get to see some really cool stuff that other judges in other districts don't get to see because our state capital is located in Jackson. And so we get a lot of state cases and agency cases. I guess last year I had a case that was between the governor and the Speaker of the House over some of the CARES Act money, the COVID money. And it was a constitutional law issue that went all the way up to the Supreme Court. But because we're in Jackson, I get those cases. A couple weeks ago, I don't know if anybody heard any or has family in Jackson, and they were worried about how their trash was going to be picked up. And so the trash case ended up being a case between the city council and the mayor, and I got that case. And so you can see they're suing about something other than just money, and that gets you into the court of equity, which is our Chancery court. A lot of what we do is family law, and that's why I said, a lot looks like Judge Judy. I was joking last week, it was Halloween, and I said, you really can't make up the stuff you see in Chancery court. I've had a man who is living an alternative lifestyle as a vampire, and he's not able to pay as much child support as he was before he left his day job and became basically washing dishes in New Orleans and living this alternative lifestyle, but professed himself to be a vampire. And I also had a case where the man at the trial court level, he was an angel. At the appellate court level, he was an alien. And then a couple weeks ago, I had one where the divorce case, they were alleging that the stepmother was a witch. And I know you're probably all making strange faces and going, what is this crazy woman talking about? Because this is just crazy. But we see some very different cases and people, basically, whether it's vampires or witches or aliens or angels, we see it all in Chancery court, and you can't make this stuff up. You can't make it up. It is Judge Judy. We could have a reality show and tell some stories. I had one yesterday, a case, and it was over a man had a ton of pit bulls, and he left them in a house, and they did all kinds of destruction to the house, and a lot of damage. But again, I never thought I'd have a pit bull case, and so we never really know what we're going to see in Chancery court. Now, I want to talk about my court setup. It's not just me in the courtroom. I have a law clerk that's basically like a staff attorney, an attorney who helps me research and write. I have my court reporter. We have a court reporter shortage in the state, and that's a different kind of training but we need court reporters, and those are people in the courtroom taking down and transcribing everything that's said and preserving our court record. I've got a bailiff. Who is in charge of not only the courtroom security, but my security. So that's a little bit different in this office. Chancellors is what they call Chancery court judges. We're chancellors. It's a dangerous job to be a chancellor, because a lot of times we make people mad. We may take away their children or their home or various other things we do that affect their lives, and then we send them out into the street. In circuit court, a lot of times they're dealing with our criminal docket, and you're either going to go to jail and you're in police custody, or you're going home and you're really happy that you're going home. So there's no reason to go after a judge. But we had a chancellor in Meridian that was shot, kind of sniper range, that was shot in the parking lot of the courthouse about 2.5 years ago. And those are the kinds of things that we worry about as chancellors, because we deal with people's lives. We deal with their families, and we deal with them sometimes in their darkest times. And so chancellors, we don't use juries. There's very few cases that you can have a jury. Very few. And so most of the time it's the judge making the decision, and the judge is not only applying the law, but deciding the facts. And so we chancellors do a lot of writing. I've got my screen on now. I wanted to talk just a second about COVID and Zoom, right? So we started doing some court procedures and hearings and such via Zoom. And so I took this nice little photograph of my courtroom and I put it behind me so that you think I'm in my courtroom. I wear my robe and I wear my collar on these Zoom hearings to give it the appearance as much as possible like a real court proceeding, like you're really in court, and to give it that feel, because there is a formality in court. You're expected to be dressed. You're expected to act a certain way. There's a certain decorum that needs to be maintained. But I mean, in actuality, I am just sitting in my office, right? And you know, I think this is interesting because my robe, I wear these little collars, and you can see how they're just fake little collars that kind of go under my robe. Now, see, men might have a white button up that they wear on a regular basis, but the female judges a lot, you're going to see our collars, and you're going to see our nice, you know, little collars. I've got my gavel, and that's another, you know, sign that judges use to keep the courtroom under control. We wear the robe not as a symbol of, it's a symbol of power, and it's a reminder to judges too that it's the robe that has the power. It's not the judge, and that it's the office that we're to respect, and it's the position we're to respect. And so the robe is part of that. So again, I'll wear my robe in those. But really, I'm in my chambers. And so my chambers is essentially my office off of the courtroom. And this is where I do most of the work. And if you'll see, like behind me, you'll see nothing but big piles of paperwork and binders. That's because I spend a large amount of time reading and researching and writing. So, find out what the facts are and then apply it to the law. And so that's a lot of research and a lot of writing. So anybody thinking a career in the law, if you want to be a lawyer, a lot of it is going to be research and writing. Now, I think if you do the criminal side of it, you're in the courtroom more, you're prosecuting or defending. Those are the ones that are really getting courtroom time now. As far as the civil side of it and people suing for money and suing for different things, a lot of those never make it to the courtroom. They'll file the lawsuit and they'll settle ahead of time, but lawyers aren't seeing as much real life, trial work in the courtroom anymore. It's just gotten too expensive. It's too expensive to pay the lawyers to prepare and to have them, try a case. A lot of times it just makes it where it's too expensive of a process. So going back to my path and kind of, how I got to be where I am. I went to law school and I still didn't know what kind of lawyer I wanted to be. I knew I didn't want to do criminal law. Like that was not my calling. And I went to a law firm, a small law firm that did a lot of estate work, a lot of handling people's affairs after they've passed away. What happens to people's property when they die? How do we find the heirs? How do we, give them their assets? And then the planning part of it, right? So we're drafting wills, we're doing trusts, we were doing a lot of that type of thing. But I also did some insurance defense work for an insurance company, State Farm. So a lot of people have heard of State Farm insurance. And so, State Farm, you might have property insurance, whether you're a renter or you own property, you may pay property insurance. And if something happens, like let's say it was a dog bite, I did dog bite cases. So if your dog bit somebody and they sued you, your insurance might pay for your lawyer and your defense because it happens on your property. That's where property insurance comes in. Okay. So your property insurance was paying for your lawyer. And so I would be paid by your insurance to represent you. And so I did that for a lot of years and saw a lot of different kinds of cases. So I had a seesaw case where a kid, was kind of catapulted off of a seesaw and broke an arm, and it ended up being a lawsuit. I had a bonfire case where a child walked over a bonfire and burned the bottom of his foot. Pretty significant burns. But again, those all end up in lawsuits where the property owner is sued. And so you can see there's a ton of different kinds of law that I'm not even covering. When I went to law school, I had friends that went to work. One is corporate counsel now with Entergy, Entergy in Mississippi. One of them is corporate counsel. Well, I don't know that it's corporate because it's a public entity, but for the Children's Hospital, for Batson, and is the attorney for the Children's Hospital. And they don't really go to the courtroom. They're working in a big business setting as a lawyer, but they're protecting their company or their employer's interests, looking through legal documents or cases that may come up. And so there's lots of avenues in the legal profession. And we're having a hard time. We have more lawyers they're retiring at a faster rate than we're producing them out of the law school. A lot of our law students are leaving the state of Mississippi, and so we are needing lawyers in Mississippi. That was not the case about 10 years ago. About 10 years ago, the market was a little more saturated, and things have shifted, and now we're needing lawyers again, especially in small towns. Our small town lawyers have seem to be retiring, and people not filling those spots. So when people sell property, when they move houses, they need an attorney to do that real estate closing. And so every time a property is sold, there's usually, if there's a loan, sometimes you can do without a lawyer if there's cash payment, but most people have loans on their homes. And so anytime you sell or buy a property, you're going to need a closing attorney to make that transaction happen. And so we need lawyers in those small towns to help do all of that. I know I've just been rambling for a really long time. Do you have any?
Well, that's fine. I mean, a lot goes into your job, but one thing I wanted to talk about is when you were elected, you were part of a history making where we had all female judges in Hinds County for a short time. And it was a big deal, and that's a great accomplishment on your part. So, and again, you see on TV, everybody thinks it's just a male dominated profession, male dominated area. But what are the opportunities for females in the legal field?
Well, I have done a lot with the Women in the Profession Committee of the Mississippi Bar. I've chaired it. I've taken a lot of pride in the work I've done to promote women in my field. When I was at the law firm, for most of the time, I was the only woman lawyer there. And I was the first female partner at my law firm. And my law firm was my previous law firm was founded in 1991. And so the idea that they had been around for 25 years and I was the first woman to be at the table, I took great pride in that, because it was like, you got to be the first, or one of the first. And it was little things that making the men realize they had not thought about. And it's a silly example, but I'll give this example. So I had been there about 10 years, and Christmas, we didn't really get off a whole lot of time at Christmas. You could take off personal time, but as far as the office being closed and you getting it off, we would usually get Christmas Day and we would close Christmas Eve about a half a day. But what would happen is the attorneys would all go to lunch, and then they would come back from lunch, and it would be 1:30, and they'd say, all right, well, we're going to start shutting the office down, and let everybody go home for Christmas. Well, one of the first things I said as partner is, why are all the attorneys going to lunch? Because at this point, those were all the men. The men were all going to lunch, and they were all coming back. And the women in the office were all there waiting to go home because they've got meals to cook, and, Santa's coming that night, and, Christmas is the next day. They've got stuff to do, and they're all sitting around waiting on their attorneys to come back from lunch so that they can go up. And I said, why are we doing that? Why don't we just shut the office down at noon and let them have the half a day? Well, the men lawyers had never thought about all the things the women were having to do at Christmas. They just never thought about it.
Wow. And
it's just a little, and that's kind of stereotyping some gender roles, but it is, right? Where, mamas are a lot of times doing the cooking and dad's working. I think a lot of that has changed just as our society has changed. We're just not as traditional as we were, and that is yielding itself to women having more opportunities. So I never felt that I didn't have opportunity or that I couldn't do something. I've never, had outright sexism like that, but being the first still is something because you're the only one in the room like you, right? Yeah. And so it's still an honor and quite a recognition to be able to do that. So the judge that had my spot before me, he sat on the bench for over 20 years, and he retired. And so I decided that I would run, for his open seat. And so I became the first female chancellor in my district. And at the same time, Faye Peterson was elected to circuit court, which meant that my district elected entirely women to represent our district. And so that was quite an accomplishment. Hinds County has a lot of women judges right now, and the last election, was all women elected. Now there are still some men. I mean, we have Judge Kidd across the street, and we've got Judge Thomas over here. So there are still some men, but that particular election was all women. And I think it says a lot that our society is electing women to serve as judges. You know, I think that's quite to be commended for where we are as a society, that, you know, that we're to that point.
Yeah, and before I get to some of the students' questions, because I got some great ones, I think just for everybody watching now and that's going to watch later, I think it's important to understand that, you know, the legal system isn't something to be scared of, because like you said, just because you're going to court doesn't mean somebody's going to jail. Just because you have an attorney doesn't mean somebody's going to go to jail. You know, these systems are in place to protect your rights, protect your property, and protect your assets.
So, you know, there's some other fun stuff. Like yesterday, I got to do an adoption, and it wasn't what I call like you know, when we think adoption, we think a lot of times it's children in foster care that are being adopted. And those really are the best days, because they're finding their forever homes.
Awesome.
And we try to make it a lot of fun for the children. And I give them a certificate. I kind of print up a certificate that they can save and kind of have a keepsake. And that's a really special day. But yesterday's adoption we're seeing more of these, but it's essentially the the father of the child's rights had been terminated, and I don't know why. I just know that his rights were terminated years ago in another county. And so that's usually where maybe you've got somebody incarcerated for a long period of time, or there's been some allegation of abuse or neglect or some reason that we're going to terminate dad's parental rights. And so at this time, the child has a mother, legally has one parent, and she remarried. And so stepdad was adopting the child. And so the child will then have the same last name, and it'll be part of that family unit and can inherit from the child. But I say all of that to say that we have, you know, so I had a 6-year-old in court yesterday, and we don't want these children to think that the only time they're going to come to court, it's going to be negative, or that something bad is going to happen. I get to marry people. So I sometimes have people come to my courtroom to get married. And so that's, you know, another fun time that wouldn't, you know, you wouldn't be going to court thinking something bad's going to happen. You're going to get married. A lot of times I have people coming to court over settlements. And so there's been a car wreck case or something else of the sort, and somebody's paying money to a minor for injuries. So, you know, I mean, if any of y'all have ever been in a car accident or had anything happen, well, you're not old enough to sign those documents that would release the other party or that would entitle you to a check. So that goes through Chancery court. But on those days, everybody's here. One party's given money and the other party's accepting money, and everybody's happy, right? Because we're settling the case and some money is being exchanged, and everybody's happy. So there are days where we have cases and there's good stuff going on.
That's awesome. But I do have some questions, and these are all 9th graders, and these are some great questions. But this is Eric Brown. This is Eric Brown, and he asked, if a couple is getting divorced and they have a child, how do you decide who the child is in custody of?
So that's a great question. Our Mississippi Supreme Court has set out factors. They're called the Albright Factors because it came from a divorce case, the Albrights, Mr. and Ms. Albright. They got divorced, and our Supreme Court said, here are the factors that the chancellors are to use when determining who gets custody. And so there's a whole checklist of factors, and I get to decide what weight I give each of the factors. There's lots of them. Continuity of care, who's been with the child, who's primarily cared for the child, the age of the parties. I mean, you know, I'm being dramatic here, but, you know, say the dad is 82. And, you know, he's you know, he's in the nursing home, you know, that would be a factor that I would consider. If, you know, mama was 40, you know, that's a factor. The age, the health of the parents, same thing. I mean, you know, if one parent was in poor physical health versus another. So there's a whole lot of factors, and we balance those factors.
That's awesome. This is Nakia Ross, and she asked, as a judge, who are some people that you admire?
Oh, who are some people that I admire? Well, you know, I admire a lot of our elected officials, people that put themselves out there to be elected. I think we as a society have made it a pretty miserable experience and a pretty hard thing to have to go through. And so I admire our leaders that put themselves out there to run for office. I have some favorites as far as Supreme Court justices. I was a big Ruth Bader Ginsburg fan, and so I know she's left us now, but being a very strong woman on the Supreme Court, and I really admired her. I'm trying to think of some, others, I have a strong mom role model, and I hope that all of us have somebody in our lives that we can say that about, if it's an aunt or a grandparent. I hope we all have somebody in our lives that we can say that we admire and that instill in us some values that we want to emulate, that we want to show. And so my mom helped me campaign. We moved here from California. I moved, started Madison Central. I came in 10th grade. Oh, wow. And had moved from California. And so my mother has, my mother was very active in the Democratic Party in Hinds County and in Mississippi, and she has, she really helped me campaigning and going door to door, and her just never gave up and just went like the Energizer Bunny. And so those are things like, I thought, Guy, if I can be like that when I'm 70, I'm having a hard time at 42 trying to keep up. But I hope we all have somebody in our lives that we can say that about.
Oh, that's awesome. This is Jordan Conway, and he asked, has there ever been a time where after a case was decided, you felt you made the wrong decision?
So I try really hard to leave it at the office. I mean, we see some people, we see dark stuff, y'all, and we see people in their dark times. And so, I see some stuff that I try not to take home with me. I've got kids, and I've got, I'll have kids the age of children in court, and things are happening, and you internalize it. But the answer to that question is yes. And I'll give you a specific. So I ruled on a case one week, and it was a divorce case. It was a temporary, and basically somebody's got to stay in the house, somebody's got to leave the house, and somebody's got to get the kids, and somebody else isn't going to get the kids. And in this particular case, dad was going to keep the kids, dad was going to keep the house, and mother had been a stay-at-home mother for 16 years. And what am I going to do with mother? And so I ruled from the bench, and I told the lawyers what I wanted to happen. And then that next Monday, I followed up with an email, and not that I thought I had made the wrong decision, but I added where I could get her some more money, and I could help get her a place, where I could put some things in action that would make it so that mom could kind of set up an independent house. But I think that we do the best we can with the information that's presented to us at the time. And sometimes we get more information, or we, look at it a different way. I think we constantly worry that we're not making the right decision because the stakes are so high. I mean, when you've got a case and they're, alleging abuse or neglect, and you send them back into the house, and if something were to happen, the judge is going to feel responsible for that. And I think that's a natural, just a natural part of it. Yeah. I had one case where there was a civil commitment done, meaning mother was ruled, and she was basically not mentally competent, right? She needed to be committed. She was hearing voices. She was hearing people in the attic. I mean, she was going to burn them out of the attic. I mean, it was bad. And so I entered the commitment order that she be committed to our state hospital. Only our state hospital didn't have any rooms. And so they were sending people by the house to check on her daily. Well, that meant she was still in the house with the children and the husband that had committed her. Mm-hmm. Things like that, if something were to happen, I would feel awful, but in the end, I have to know that I am only a part of a process. I am only a part of it, and I can do my job, and I can make sure my staff does their job. But in the end, we don't have control over, anything else.
Yeah, that's a great point. This is Jacquez Smith, and he asked, how do you handle people that get out of control in the courtroom?
So I have a great bailiff. I wish he would stick his head in and I would tell him to come say hi to y'all. But my bailiff, I just look at my bailiff and then I direct the parties. I will use my gavel. You know, I don't use my gavel a great. It's so loud.
It's not I think David Archie gets enough of that in Hinds County.
Yeah, I think we don't want to go overboard on the gavel. And so I'm bringing him in. Tim, come say hi. You have to take your mask off. I want you to say hi to this 9th grade class. Come step in.
Hey, how y'all doing?
Go down a little bit. All right, so this is my bailiff. This is Deputy Johnson. And so he's charged with keeping order in the courtroom. And so thank you. They were asking about keeping my courtroom. How do I keep people in order? And I said, well, Tim, my bailiff helps me do that. And so if somebody continues to disobey my orders, you know, if I said, you know, Mr. Smith, sit down. Mr. Smith, you've been told to sit down. Mr. Smith, if you do not sit down, you will be held in contempt. And a contempt charge could be that I fine you. It could be that you go to jail. And so the contempt charge is where, you know, that's where we go if you're really disobeying me. So if you want to yell and scream at the judge and call her ugly names, you're going to get stop it. And then you're probably going to get escorted across the street.
Yeah. That's really the only time you throw people in jail is when they want to act crazy on you.
So the only time you're going to jail, it's that or you're in contempt of one of my orders. And so just quite frankly, not paying child support.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, so we get those and I'll get the dad that's like, I am not paying her money and she is not getting my money and I'll pay for the baby, but I am not paying her. And I'm like, okay, you're going across the street because you're violating my order. You're under an order to pay child support. The state states what that is. And I'll say for all you young men out there, having a child out of wedlock you'll be expected to pay child support. You're expected to pay 14% of your adjusted gross income for that child. That can add up if you have, you know, several children. You start taking away that money out of your paycheck. And so I'll have folks in here that, you know, they're not very old, you know, say you got a 23-year-old and he's got 2 or 3 children and he's paying child support here and there and his paycheck doesn't leave him enough to live off of. And, you know, we can do a little bit of maneuvering, but the Supreme Court says what those percentages are. And I don't like sending people to jail for not paying child support because I think that takes away your ability to go generate money to pay child support. But every once in a while, there's just the defiant, you know, I'm not going to do it, and I'm not going to follow your order, and so I'll put you in, you know, you'll go to jail for that too.
And just got one more before we close out, but this is David Ford, and he's asking about the type of schedule you have because I know it is for the most part it's pretty set, and you know they have the weekends off, but how all does that work?
So my particular judges I set my docket, I set my calendar. So the way my court operates is that we have court Monday through Thursday. Court docket, like actual in the courtroom, starts at 9, and then we're back after lunch at 1:30. And so you see, I get a little bit of wiggle room in there to review cases and files so I can get into work before the actual court starts in the morning and the afternoon and just make sure that, you know, I've read through and I know what we're doing. And so that's 4 days a week. And then Friday I keep for writing my legal opinions and flow over, but flow over really, because say we had a case on Tuesday and we didn't finish, right? We didn't finish our case. We got a little more testimony. If you need a court date from me and you come right now asking for a court date, you're probably in March. Okay. You're going to be in March before you get a court date.
Wow.
Well, that's why I keep Fridays. So I can squeeze in emergencies and temporaries and overflows. And so if we have an emergency custody case, they can't wait until March. You know, they need it. It's an emergency. They need help now. And so that's what Fridays are for. But the reality of that is that I end up with 1 or 2 Fridays off a month if I stay up on my writing. If I do my written work, then I'll end up with a Friday or 2 off a month. And that's very nice. But that's my court schedule.
Okay. And we thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're really busy, but before we go, just talking, everybody here is from Madison County, just like you. You're a female that, we went to high school together. You come from the same area as everybody watching. So, especially for our young ladies watching, what can these young people do, even if it's not in the legal field, what can they do to be as successful as you've become?
Well, thank you. That's a compliment. I'm gonna take that compliment. But so, I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. Okay. I want you to conceptualize that. First person in my family to graduate from college. So there were no lawyers in my family to tell me how to do it. There was nobody to get me a job at the law firm or to get me I was the first. And so I think the suggestion I would give is to realize that everything you're doing now, you are investing in yourself. So do things now that your later self will thank you for. I tell students, when I have troubled students in court, I ask them to take out a sheet of paper and write down where they want to be in 10 years. And if you don't know what kind of job you want to have, what kind of physical things do you want to have? I mean, do you want to have a car? Do you want to have a house or a townhouse or a condo? Or, what kind of things do you want to have? And how are you going to get there? And so start mapping out what you can do to make yourself more valuable. Even if it's reading the book instead of, reading somebody's notes, right? Where you're, I get onto my teenage boys for that all the time about taking the easy way out. Because you're not investing in yourself, you're not helping yourself. And so it's to recognize that nobody is going to invest in you as much as you are. And that's what you're doing right now. I mean, ninth grade, it may seem like you've got forever. I mean, and law school, you go to college 4 years and then law school's 3 years. And so that's 7 years after college. And it seems like a lot when you're in it, but once you're on the other side of it and you realize you have your whole life to practice in that area, it's definitely worth the investment. So don't shy away from the work, because the work is investing in you and making yourself more valuable.
Wow, that's some great stuff, and we've come a long way since Madison Central. But I thank you so much for joining us. I know you're super busy, but that was some great stuff. And if we have any other questions, I'll make sure to email you. But thanks again so much. It's always an honor.
Well, thank y'all for having me. Y'all have a great day.
All right, thank you so much.